The category is What the Trans, darling.
Hello everyone and welcome to What the Trans.
What the Trans?
What the Trans indeed. And joining me today as my second co-host guest person is Diamond Stylze. Diamond Stylze is one of the premier voices of the millennial black trans community. She is currently the executive director of Black Trans Women Inc., a national non-profit that is led by black trans women focused on social advocacy, positive visibility, and building strong leadership amongst black trans advocates, activists, and our allies. And also, she is the host and producer of Marsha's Plate.
Yay!
A weekly podcast that archives and centers trans-inclusive, pro-black feminism and pop culture. Diamond. Hello. So, I don't know if you will be aware of this, but this was originally going to be an episode around a panel of people of colour in general as part of our What the Pride series of shows to try and replace various things you would find at a Pride that have all been cancelled because of COVID-19.
Right.
But then certain events in the States happened that meant a rethink of how we were going to do this episode. It's very strange that we coincidentally scheduled this weeks ago to come out now,
right,
before knowing of what was going to happen.
Because how could we? How could we not?
You can't really tell when things will ignite and things will kick off like the way they did. So this was very much a...
Statistically, you know it's going to happen again. you know it's going to happen again because it just hasn't stopped over the years. We've been talking about this for definitely all of my life. It's an incident that comes up, every couple of years. And the difference now is, of course, technology. So we know that it's going to happen because they haven't done the work around fixing the institution of the police state. So we know it's going to happen again, but we can't always predict it. When exactly?
Yeah, it's just really strange how we planned this, what was going to be a pretty all-encompassing people of colour special where we would be handing the keys to the episode to some people of non-white experience, but then it just so happened to be timed so right with the stuff that has been happening lately. But we can get to the stuff that's been happening lately very shortly. For to start with, I want to focus on you. So, Diamond, there are people out there who have not listened to Marsha's Plate, and that is a crime. So please, please, please plug your amazing podcast because it is genuinely... There are some parts of it that I do not necessarily understand that well because I do not come from the culture that has very much produced it. But I would say it's one of the funniest podcasts that I've heard in a long time. So, but also with lots of pathos and very, very big, awesome learning opportunities for white idiots like me. So, Diamond, tell us about what you do.
Well, I want to first of all thank you for having me and thank you for being an example of how to show up as an ally. Just really, just the handing over your platform to somebody that is a part of a marginalized group is one of the ways, allies can really show up and really do even a small thing to be able to kind of amplify our voices. So I want to absolutely thank you for even giving me the opportunity and being humble to give me a space on your platform. So definitely thank you.
That's literally the most and least I can do. Stuck in my flat in South London under lockdown rules that I don't understand anymore because our Prime Minister's a bit of a dick and doesn't really explain things that well. So I don't exactly know if I can go outside or not.
We have something in common because our president is a bit of a big dick. And not the good kind.
Yeah, so what could people expect to hear when they listen to your show? And what could people expect to hear from you?
So I am a vet trans activist here in the United States. I am originally from Indianapolis, Indiana, but I grew up there, Boston, Massachusetts, and Mississippi, one of the most conservative states in the United States. But I currently live in Houston, Texas. I have been doing activist work since about 1999 when I sued my high school to go to the prom in a gender-affirming gown. That is one of the things that sparked me knowing that I had the power to say no to structures and systems, and I had the power to kind of speak truth to power and do something to change a narrative. And ever since then, a lot of people have been able to go to the prom in my state because of the thing that I did in 1999, because my case set the precedent in our court system. And so anytime somebody is trying to stop them from wearing what they want to in school, they can use my case as an example to fight, to either sue or force them to kind of do what's respectful of their gender. So that's how I started. I went to college in 2000, and I was the first trans woman to ever go to the school that I attended, which is Jackson State University. And I kind of broke ground there, and now it has even more of a presence of LGBT people at the school. I was actually living full-time as a woman, and they put me in a boys' dorm. And so I was harassed, bullied, never directly attacked, but people tried to throw boiling hot water on me. People tried to, attack. Well, I started the fight because I was being disrespected. So I started the fight. So they didn't attack me, I attacked them. But it was because it had led up, because so many things had happened that had led up to me just being so angry. And I just kind of lashed out because they were just harassing me, calling me names, throwing oranges at me, throwing bottles at me, isolating me, and just doing too much. And this is students and professors. And so I kind of broke ground and still was able to finish school and get my education. And then as life went on, it led me to creating a podcast. Well, becoming a YouTuber, then creating a podcast. And Marsha's Plate started in 2017. I was inspired by the 2016 election. And I wanted, every time somebody put a microphone in the face of a trans person, it was about the bathroom bills. It was about bathroom. And I was so annoyed by that. First of all, it definitely wasn't a Black person. It was usually a white trans person. But if they did ask them a question, it was about the bathroom bill. And for me, as a Black trans woman living in the United States, I have much, much dire issues and needs other than a bathroom. I can go piss on a tree if I have to, but sometimes there are trans people out here who don't have a place to stay because they're homeless, and shelters won't accept them of any gender because the male shelter won't accept them because they have maybe surgeries or anything like that. The female shelters won't accept them because they are not, quote, this is from a trans woman's perspective, because they are not cisgender. And and a lot of times we have changed it. Some of the activism that I was a part of prior in 2007, when I was homeless, I couldn't even go to the LGBT shelter because I wasn't HIV positive. And their grant money only allowed them to help people who were positive. And so there was no shelter that I was allowed to go to of any kind. There was no infrastructure in the city that I was living in when I was homeless. So things have changed so far. That was in 2007, but now things have changed. But that's what I'm talking about. There is much, much bigger issues for me when it comes to survival and really living a life of quality. When we talk about housing and healthcare and love and relationships, there was much, much more important issues for the trans community that fall more seriously outside of just the bathroom bill. So I was like, well, I am in a lucky time in our history where I have the tool that is the internet. And with that tool, as you know, we can have a podcast and put out information and put out stories and put out narratives that we think is important to uplift and shine light on, that is important to our survival, important to shift the culture and the narrative in how the national spotlight is talking about us and our experience. And so I said, well, I'm going to create a podcast because I don't have to worry about gatekeepers. I can actually report on things that I think is important to the trans community, that is more important than bathrooms. And we have grown in 3 years. We went from, of course, no, you start off with zero. We went from getting, 50, 200 listeners each episode. Now we are at 16,000 a month. And so for me, I think we have grown super amazing because we speak truth to power. We really try to give, a dose of truth, but also with humor, with seriousness. But also we take time. There's a segment in our show called Trans 101 where we take time to break down some of the things that are simple that we as trans folks may think, oh, you should automatically know that. But somebody just coming, being introduced to us may be new to this. So we take time to teach you about simple concepts from gender identity. What's the difference between sexual orientation and gender identity? From masculine and feminine, so many different concepts in our culture that somebody just coming into this may not understand. So we take the time to educate, but we also take the time to be real. So we talk from the 101 level all the way up to the college level when it's about transness. And that's what you should expect from, because, I know my history, and I'm formally educated and street educated. So I know from all aspects of life, I have had a vast experience from bougie, upper class, rich folks to poor, homeless, everything. I have had a full life. So I'm able to educate people. And that's what I do on my show with a Black trans man and another Black trans woman as my co-host.
Yeah, and I genuinely mean this. You should all listen to it. And there was, I've got to say that when you do that, you do offer some one-on-one moments for people that we don't do on this show. We decided, much to sort of screw over our own financial viability as an enterprise, made the promise that all of our content is going to be aimed purely at trans, non-binary, and intersex people. And we're not going to make any allowances for people who have no idea what is going on here. Although I think this does reflect a certain difference in the way that the US and the UK trans communities work, in that the UK trans community is more of an outsider. Trans people in the UK seem to have their own fiefdom that is so separate from society. Whereas in the US, you hear of trans people who are activists, but they are asked to be activists in many different fights, whereas trans people tend to only be expected to care about one.
So don't get me wrong. We are going through that struggle too, but it sounds like we're just a little bit more advanced in holding our allies and people who use our narrative accountable for just calling on us on trans issues. We have struggled in getting heard outside of the trans topic. So we may be just a little bit further along in that fight, I think, because we still struggle with that as well.
I was just talking in very, very broad strokes about the whole of the community. When it comes to certain other issues, what confuses me about the UK community is that there is such a way in for us to become seen as the part of society we actually are, not as this other ethereal thing off away from people. We've got the NHS here, our national healthcare system, which has been, I know this is probably me telling someone without water that the well I have is broken. When it comes to universal healthcare, as you would put it, the fight isn't over once you get it. The fight is about keeping it, because there are people that are trying to take the money away and give the money to private companies. And that is a battle that has been going on in the UK pretty much since the 40s when we got universal healthcare, but very much in the last 10 years whilst we've had a Conservative government who would love to chop it up and sell it to all of their wealthy mates.
Trying to gut it.
Yeah, they're trying to gut it, and they have been very successful. Richard Branson, the Virgin guy, owns an alarming amount of our National Health Service now, which is terrifying, and not enough people know about that.
Capitalism.
Yep, that's what it is. See,
that's literally what it is.
But yeah, there is a way for the trans community to stand up and be like, the NHS is a wonderful thing for us because they do provide us with hormones and surgeries very slowly, but they do. So having a health service that is there for everyone that works is an issue that the trans community could join the rest of the UK with. Whereas in the States, there's issues around, because landlords in the US have so many more rights, and that affects trans people disproportionately, because you've got all those states where it's just oh, you're trans, bye, we can kick you out now.
I live in one of those states.
Yeah, but you can join that fight and be like, well, this affects trans people too, but this affects everybody. And it's always surprising to me to see how in the States other causes will unite, whereas in the UK, that doesn't seem to be the case. Do you have any advice on that? Help us out. Just help us out.
I don't, because it's kind of strange over here too, because if you go to like California and New York, it's like a total different situation. Like they have, I don't want to say they have universal health care, but they have a infrastructure in their healthcare system where trans girls and guys can get surgeries, trans-affirming surgeries in their particular state. But if you come to like a southern state like mine, or, like Mississippi or Alabama or Georgia, we don't have those same protections. We don't have that kind of same infrastructure to help us along in our, now when you get on Obamacare, we thought that it would help us, but it did help us get certain things, but we didn't know that because of how California is, Obamacare helps them out more in regards to trans than it does in Texas. Texas doesn't have the infrastructure for us to get those kind of surgeries in Texas. We will have to actually become residents of those states. And so really for us, I don't know how it works in the UK, but for us, it's really just getting out here and voting in our local elections, and not just the national elections, but really get out here and organizing around who is actually puts us to the forefront and don't leave us with the lesser of two evil kind of choices that we have been in for the past two elections.
Yeah, for reasons like, I want to say that for reasons that me and Diamond discussed before we started recording, I really don't want to have to put a certain word in this sentence here, but I have to for legal reasons to avoid being sued. Yeah, you got to trust between two alleged rapists.
Yeah.
That's the decision coming up in November.
Yeah, two alleged rapists. Yeah. Like it's like this is what the politics have narrowed down to.
Yeah, I mean, if I was in the ballot box voting in the American election, I mean, Biden would probably get my vote, but then I'd have to live with the whole, I voted for that guy against Trump, which compared to the two, like, obviously he's better. Obviously he's better than Trump.
Yeah.
But look, I mean, you can't see the face I'm pulling, listeners, but you can imagine.
Right.
It's not, I don't feel comfortable saying that. Yeah. But anyway, we could go all down the route of why the UK and the US are uniquely, but not that uniquely, kind of fucked. But let's go to some actual terrible news of why specifically the United States are going through a bit of a moment right now. So the news this week is going to be focusing almost entirely on the death of an American black man, and what we know about his death in the context of the now global protests against white supremacy and police violence against black people that surely, listener, you will have noticed. And if you haven't, last week we reported on the much publicised murder of George Floyd, a cisgender black man, at the hands of a Minnesota Police Department police officer who knelt on Floyd's neck until 2 minutes after Floyd had died. And we also talked about how this event had sparked protests across the United States and have started appearing in other countries all around the world. But the black man I wanted to talk about today was not George Floyd, but a man you may not have heard much about, Tony Mcdade, who was a black trans man who was shot and killed by an unnamed Tallahassee police officer last month on the 27th. The Tallahassee Police Department had initially released a statement saying that Mcdade had been the suspect in a stabbing that had taken place earlier that day. They alleged that Mcdade was in possession of a handgun and that a bloody knife was found at the scene. However, many witnesses to the police shooting dispute these accounts as, according to witnesses speaking to local news media, which we will link to in the link sheet, the police officer failed to tell Mcdade that they were a police officer, and at that time Mcdade was actually unarmed. There's been an aura of mystery surrounding Mcdade's death, and in a journalism legal capacity, this podcast was on legally shaky grounds, anyway referring to the murder of George Floyd as a murder and not an alleged murder. But gonna do that anyway, because saw the video. It's a murder. Come at me, Minnesota Police Department, I guess. Gonna call it as I see it.
We saw the knee on the neck.
Yeah, we saw it. I can't put alleged there without losing sleep at night. Like, it feels morally wrong to put the alleged there, so not gonna do it. Not gonna do it. But anyway.
Right.
So talking about this Mcdade death in an official news capacity is legally tricky, especially considering that there are details coming out very slowly over this, as this case has not gotten the attention that I would argue it deserves. But what I can say, in a personal capacity, based on the amount of times we have seen police departments in the US and the UK actively lie to protect their officers after the death of a person of colour, especially the death of a black person.
Yep.
All I can say is now that we can go to the private opinions of myself, Michelle O'Toole, and Diamond Stylze. So, Diamond Stylze, what are your private personal opinions on what the hell's going on here?
Oh, gosh. So let me say this. So, All Lives Matter is a humanitarian ideal that we have not yet to accomplish. For centuries, we have had so many people from our past blow the whistle about the insidious ways that this justice system and the military and so on has kind of just slayed our community. We know that from reading the journals of white ship captains who had slave ships. When we read their journals, we learn that slaves were jumping off of the ships. When we go to court cases of Elizabeth Freedman, when she sued for her freedom as a slave. When we talk about Frederick Douglass, when we talk about the Black trans woman Frances Thompson of the Memphis 1866 riots, who was raped by a mob of white men when she was roommates with a cisgender girl, and they raped both of them. And she testified in Congress, one of the first people in the United States to testify against Congress. When we talk about Ida B. Wells, a journalistic pioneer, us as podcasters know how important journalism can be to get the truth out. And she was a Black woman who pioneered honest conversations about race in this country. When we talk about Rodney King, when we talk about DeWanna Johnson, who was attacked in a police station in Memphis, Tennessee in 2008. When we talk about Breonna Hill, who was beat by 2 police officers. And just this month, May 16th, well, not this month, it's June now, but last month, May 16th, the video comes out of her being beat by 2 police officers. We have, and I'm just listing all of these things so y'all understand that this is not the first time that we have been talking about how these systems are unfair to us. The police system, the structure of the law, the justice system, the arm of white supremacy that is the police state. When we talk, we have been whistleblowing for centuries. These are facts. So when we blow the whistle on what's happening, we're not saying that the ideal of all lives actually mattering is not, that is important. Yes, idealistically, we want all lives to matter, but what we are telling you is that they don't matter. So when we talk about George Floyd, there's a certain value that happens when it is a Black, male, cis heteronormative body that is murdered. When you think of how many cases that go viral, Trayvon, Orlando Castillo, George Floyd, Alton Sterling, and so on, the list goes on. It's something about the Black cishet male body that goes viral because it has more importance in a patriarchal world. That has more importance. So everybody goes up in arms about this Black cishet man dying. But when it comes to Black women, when we talk about Breonna Taylor in Louisville, Kentucky, this same month of May of 2020, she was murdered. And people had to force people to, by the police, people had to force people to say her name and uplift this Black woman who was who was in her home. The police broke into her house, and the person who they were looking for was already in their custody in jail, and they just didn't know it. They came to this woman's house and murdered her. She was not a criminal. She was in her house asleep, and they came in there and murdered her. And it wasn't until George Floyd, a black cis hetero man, was murdered that everybody went up in arms to become to protest. But when it was a woman, when it was a Tony Mcdade, who was a trans man, when it was a trans woman who was beat, Breonna Hill, you do not hear the community going up in arms about them. So what I'm trying to express to y'all is that there are certain things that privilege people, even within their death. Yes, we are fighting white supremacy because it wants to kill all Black lives. But we also are fighting other isms like classism and patriarchy and those things, because even within that, even in the murders that the police are doing, there's still a privilege that men body gets that other people who are trans, queer, women, trans women, trans men, anything outside of cis heteronormative male that get less coverage. It goes viral less. It is talked about less, and we do not center the plight of the people, the Black people that are not cisgender heterosexual men. Do they matter? Absolutely, they matter, but other lives matter as well, and we do not show up for them in the same exact way. So I say this to say we haven't reached the level of perfection. We probably never will, but we haven't reached the point where all lives matter yet. So saying it is disrespectful, is disingenuous. We need to say that Black lives matter, but all Black lives matter, not just cis heterosexual men, because I'm a both and type of person. I can call out white supremacy, and I can also call out patriarchy. And both of those things are in fact impacting how we see these cases blow up. So I wanted to kind of share that.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. I think that's really interesting. And it also brought up something that we could maybe workshop here, because I've been following the Tony Mcdade specifically story pretty much since it came out on the 28th. Last week, I was putting together the news for this, and I chose not to cover Tony Mcdade last week, mostly because the details that had emerged straight off, there weren't enough there for me to dig into in a way and talk on it with any authority. This was just before the witness statements came out. So I guess I purposefully, on last week's episode, made a choice to feature George Floyd, admittedly as the basis for how you can help. But I didn't. I chose not to cover Tony Mcdade, who was a Black trans man who had been shot and killed by police officers. And I made that decision because, in the back of my head, I didn't know if he had done something to justify it or not. What do you think of that? I know I'm putting you on the spot here, and if you don't want to go into why Michelle's a problematic piece of shit because it's awkward, that's fine.
No. I think that's an honest conversation. I think we have to understand that it doesn't matter what happened. It really doesn't matter. Police should not be using lethal force. I don't think so. There's ways to de-escalate situations to a certain level, and this particular case wasn't somebody who I feel, based on the evidence that I see and hear from the witnesses, this wasn't something that couldn't be de-escalated. And so for me, I'm always about de-escalating a situation. I think they should be in the state that the police are now. They should be trained. I'm a defund, abolish the police type of person. But that comes later. I know we can't just, that we have to imagine a better way of being. We can't just be like, but if we get rid of the police, I'm a Black trans person, or I'm a trans person. What if somebody tries to attack me and I need to call the police and da-da-da-da-da? We have to reimagine. If we start by fixing the homophobia, if we start by fixing the transphobia, if we start by actually teaching children from a young age about different things outside of religion, if we start teaching them how to be tolerant and how to accept diversity, if we started on a base level and go even further, really think about use our imagination to think of creative ways of how we can police people. How can we creative ways of how we can deal with problems in our society that avoid these types of situations? And that's across the board. When we talk about one of the markers of higher crime is not race, it's poverty. When we talk about crime rates, it's not about race, because in poor white neighborhoods, the crime rate is high. In poor Black neighborhoods, the crime rate is high. In rich Black neighborhoods, the crime rate is low. In rich white neighborhoods, the crime rate is low. The marker of the crime rate being high is poverty. So how can we fix poverty? We cannot fix poverty without dismantling capitalistic predatory behavior. We can't do that. So we have to really imagine a different type of world that we can actually live in, and strategies that we can use. We cannot be stuck in the way we have the world now, because it is broken. There are ways that, is it going to happen overnight? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Are we going to just hurry up and say, all police stations are closed? No, that's not going to happen. That's not realistic. But we have to start thinking about a new way in order to fix the problem. We have to use our imagination. We have to be creative. We have to really think of, really innovative ways to fix the problems that we are having. If we don't do that, we're going to keep seeing the same thing that we have seen over and over and over and over and over. So with the Tony Mcdade situation, I think that him and George Floyd, nobody is a perfect victim. Look at how they talk about George Floyd. They're trying to say he had a drug in his system. They said he was trying to do scams with checks, one thing I heard, he was trying to use a fake $20 bill. Oh, he did porn because there was a porn video that's out of him. They all try to do these things to assassinate their character, to make you feel like this person was not a good person, so he deserved to die. I don't care. That's not okay. We do not need to assassinate characters. Neither one of them deserve to die, period. No victim of police. I
absolutely agree with that.
Right.
In the UK, we don't have police with guns, really. We do sometimes. But
sometimes.
Yeah, I don't believe that the police should be able to murder anyone.
Yeah.
But then I still made that decision, like a couple of hours before recording the news last time, to not talk about the black trans man, but talk about the cisgender black man. I don't...
On a trans show.
On a trans show. And I think back, and at that point, what was going through my head was, I don't know enough about this Tony Mcdade thing. There's my personal beliefs, and then there's journalism Michelle. Uh-huh. And journalism Michelle thinks a little differently than the Michelle you're talking to now, who very much believes in, at the very least, massive restructuring reform of the police, if not absolute abolition. That's my personal belief. One of them has to happen, and attempts at the first one haven't really gone that well, so maybe we should think about the second. That's where I'm at. Yeah. Seems to be very much on the same page as you in regards to that.
I think sometimes we're on autopilot, and I don't think it's a conscious decision all the time, but sometimes we're on autopilot, and it was more popular to talk about George, and there was an actual video. That's another thing that I wanted to add to the conversation. We have known that they have been terrorizing our communities in this way for centuries, as I laid out earlier. But only reason why we are actually discussing it on the level that we are discussing it is because of technology. The technology has allowed us to see it more frequently. It's happened so often that our allies and our and even our enemies they can no longer hide and be complacent behind like this myth that it's only, it's just a few bad apples. It's just a few bad apples that's creating these rare incidents. And that's just not true. What we're seeing with these videos is that it is a structural, systematic, corrupt system that prioritizes, that has these cowards with these badges and guns who are scared of Black people or overusing their power. they're scared of Black people, so they just shoot first and think later, or they're not thinking and they're doing stupid stuff like putting their knees on Black men's necks for 8 minutes after they're telling you they can't breathe. And you're not seeing that this is a human being who needs to breathe that is under your knee. You are not seeing this because you are drunk with power and you have 4 people holding him down. And you are not seeing his humanity enough to care. And so you are a coward. And we are seeing this cowardice and we're seeing this overuse of power on video. Previously, when it wasn't on video, it was just a myth that only Black people knew. I remember when I was 5 years old. I was 5 years old in 2008. I'm not 2008. I was 5 years old in 1987 when Michael Taylor in Indianapolis, Indiana, was killed in the back of a police car while he was handcuffed, and the police officer said that he killed himself while he was handcuffed. So this is something that has been going on in my life, on and on and on in the Black community, where we knew this was happening. But now with technology, we actually are seeing incidents of it happening on video. That's number one. We are seeing incidents happening on video, but also with social media, we're able to share it with multitude of people immediately, and they can retweet it and go viral and share it on Facebook and share it on Instagram. And it just multiple people. So it's undeniable to the people who used to say, maybe this was a rare incident. And it's not a rare incident. This is something that happens all the time because it is a broken system. And these men are breaking the communal contract that we have with police officers. The contract is that all lives matter. That's the contract. That's what it's supposed to be, that we all care, but they don't care. And they are breaking the contract that they are doing, and people are fed up. And what you are seeing is people responding to the disappointment in them breaching that contract that we have with them. You are supposed to protect and serve, and you are not protecting and serve. You are murdering. And that is not okay. And we are tired of people getting off. We are tired of people getting convicted or not getting convicted at all, or they get convicted and then get off. We are tired of this. This is not okay. And what you see around the globe in solidarity is people saying it's not okay. I love peaceful, but I also love the ones that's tearing shit down. So what you're seeing, people who are frustrated and disappointed with these cops and with the system that allowed them to do what they're doing.
Oh yeah, speaking of the tearing of things down, I don't know if you'll have heard about this, but in the UK, yesterday at time of recording, Black Lives Matter's protesters pulled down a statue in Bristol of someone I'd never heard of until yesterday, but I've done my research now, and basically this guy called Colston, who kidnapped tens of thousands of people from Africa and profited on selling them like their IKEA furniture. And the UK is now currently going through that whole thing that America has been having over the Confederate general statues. We're having that over people who were previously members of the House of Parliament who had a good old side gig in slavery.
Yeah.
I always overestimate people I shouldn't. And I thought that the UK was not going to have the conversation of, yeah, but it's history. Why would you destroy something from history? And not the, how has Bristol been living under the statue of a slaver for decades? And one, I'm only hearing of this now. And two, it was only yesterday that they pulled the fucking thing down. That's where the conversation has moved on from a media standpoint in the UK anyway, because it used to be about, well, seeing as British police officers don't have guns as often, is this as big a problem in the UK? And from the conversations I saw, it looked like people were moving just like, oh, I didn't know. Oh, okay. Now the conversation is going to be about the rights of the statues of genocidal, horrible people. And it's white media people that are doing this narrative. And I'm not trying to pull myself out of that label, even though I do make a product in the bedroom. I chose not to cover Tony Mcdade last week. I chose to only cover it this week once I had established information in my head that ticked some kind of box that I don't know is there. that needs to be dismantled in itself.
That's legit. And when we think about the history of both of our countries, you know, we're kind of like a baby version of y'all, a little mutated version of y'all, because we were birthed from y'all in America.
Yeah, but your food is so much better. That's got to be said. Your food is so much better.
So when we think about what's happening is that we're shining a light on the underbelly of all of our histories. You see what I'm saying? Like these things, these inequities and these disparities that we are seeing on a national level is birthed from the same grimy, gross underbelly of Europe and America's foundation. So these people that have been celebrated, when we talk about J. Marion Sims, the father of gynecology, when we talk about him, we talk about his advancements in women's healthcare, but we don't talk about how he learned these things by using Black slaves without any kind of pain medicines. And he used to do experiments on their bodies without pain medicines, without anything, like cutting their bodies open and destroying their insides just for the sake of medical advancements. And I'm sure there was some kind of freakish, perverted thing going on too as well. But this is one of the fathers of our medical profession that is celebrated. But that history of his, how he used slave women's bodies as guinea pigs, sexual gratification, and nobody is talking about that ugly history, but they're just celebrating this man. He has whole statues up that we are trying to get taken down because his history is disgusting.
I've never even heard of this.
So the father of gynecology, his name is James Marion Sims. And so this is, this is a part of our history, and we are, and we're shining a light in the process of these times where we are there's unrest, racial unrest. Well, it always is that, but it's a peak in it, a peak in racial discomfort. We are shining a light on these things that are not okay. And when this is what happens, we tear down your idols. We tear down your, we try to tear down your banks. We try to tear down your precincts. These are symbolism. These structures are symbols of white supremacy that needs to be torn down. And, and got to be honest about it. And so what has happened is over the centuries, people are not being honest about these people's history. They are shrouding them and putting them on a pedestal like they are heroes when they are actually not. They are disgusting human beings who have profited and advanced on the bodies of Black people. And that's just not okay.
And if you want to see how that looks in real time, listeners, and also Diamond, maybe keep an eye on the UK's discourse over Winston Churchill over the next couple of months, which I predict is going to get even more interesting than it always has.
Yeah.
And maybe at the time of recording, a statue of Winston Churchill will find its way to the bottom of the Thames in London. Maybe. Hopefully. I should maybe cut the hopefully, because that might be seen as inciting.
Hopefully.
Obviously, we do not condone the act of throwing statues into bodies of water, but if you do, please let us know so we can celebrate with you. No, we don't condone that kind of behavior here. But also, we totally do because it's awesome.
So I wanted to make sure I also add, because I'm talking about it from a Black perspective, when we're talking about, like dismantling these heroes and these idols. We really have to have a conversation about the founding fathers of psychology and how much harm that they've done to the LGBT community. When we talk about the history of them putting us in insane asylums, them putting us in making our sexuality and our gender identity things that were criminal, things that were mental issues, and then coming back in the 70s and switching it and flipping it up like they didn't have all this harm that was caused to us through conversion therapy, through the medical profession that harmed us, I do feel like they kind of owe us reparations. And I know that's kind of like, whoa. But when we talk about queer folks and how they were affected by books like the Psychiatric Association, the American Psychiatric Association, and I'm sure y'all have a version in the UK.
Oh, the DSM.
Yes, their propaganda allowed us to be demonized, allowed us to be harmed. I think that's a conversation that we definitely should have as well when we're talking about dismantling systems, especially when it comes to mental health. So I just wanted to add that too.
Should we move on to the meat of this episode, Diamond?
Let's get to the meat and potatoes.
As a part of our What the Pride series of episodes, this episode was going to be a panel of more broad topics affecting people of colour. Basically, anyone who was non-white and non-cis would come on and basically talk about whatever the hell they liked. But as a result of the recent murders committed by police officers in the States, that have come from a long line of racist murders committed by police since forever, the segment we had in mind was quickly changed to us handing the keys to the show over to Diamond Stylze, who is going to sit and have a chat with some wonderful, wonderful black trans Americans. We have Felix joining us from Denver, Colorado. We have Josephine Hoskins, who's joining us from Kansas City, Missouri. Yannick Taylor, who is the former producer of the Black, Trans and Beautiful podcast, and who is currently producing a new show called Conversations with the Priestess, which launches on July the 1st. And also joining all of them is Nim Ralph, the co-founder of QTIPOC London. So, Diamond, the show is all yours. I'm off to go and make sure my white ass has no way of interrupting or anything. So see you in a bit.
All right. So I want to thank you all first of all, I want to thank our host podcast for just giving us this platform to be able to share and discuss some of the Black trans experience that are happening right now on a global level, on a local level in the US. And, we have some people from all over the world. And I'm just so excited that there are peoples in the world who are really trying to show up as allies in this kind of way that will give up the platform for us to actually speak and share our narrative. So I appreciate you for being a great ally and allowing us this space. And I want to thank our guests for taking the time to come and have this conversation with me. Welcome. And I hope that we blow the roof off this thing.
Yes. Hell yeah, let's do it.
Let's go. So if you know me and you listen to my podcast, Marsha's Plate, you know that I kind of shoot from the hip. I cuss like a sailor sometimes, so I might say some shit, damn, fuck, all, whatever passion that, I might give you. And I invite you to be just as candid and honest about your opinions and your experiences, because I think that's what breaks yokes. That's what make people get out of the Trans 101 by giving them real conversations and not sugarcoating information and narratives and, lessons that they need to learn. So let's start with some of the questions. So I know that we're in June and it is Pride Month, and we are having something of like a moment with Black people at the beginning of the month fighting against police brutality and white supremacy and other related things, because we know that all oppression is intertwined. Mm-hmm. So I guess my first question should be, how are you all holding up? How are you taking care of yourself in these very intense times?
I am just smoking an ass ton of weed. Just an astronomical amount of marijuana I am consuming every day. And beyond that, just, making sure I take a break from being on the internet, because I am chronically ill, so I can't go to protests every day. So I have to make sure that I am keeping up to date, but also still distancing myself from all the Twitter bullshit. So it's hard to find that balance. But I think I've been doing an okay job.
Nice.
I think the biggest thing is just, take at least an hour away from the internet every day, because there's just so much crap and so much nonsense coming from everyone on all sides. And it's so overwhelming and so traumatizing. And people are just constantly, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? And you're like, can I just take a nap? Like, can we step back? Like, I'm fucking tired, man.
Right.
Yeah, just the simple things are what's getting me through this right now.
What about you, Josephine?
Well, at the risk of, kind of bleeding into this kind of traditional idea of like womanhood, I cook a lot. I've been just doing a lot more in the kitchen. Shepherd's pie, for example, is whenever I am, because there is, that kind of balance you have to find between the constant fight that is just being alive as, who we are in, the society that we find ourselves in today. So I have been working to, better myself and throw myself into projects. Cooking is one. I've been doing a lot of cleaning, just projects. That's just, I just have a bad time sitting still.
But I think that's to me, that's a freedom that comes when we are breaking those kind of gender barriers that, we don't have to be in these kind of gender boxes. I can love cooking. I can love sports. I can love video games. I can love anime. And I think that is, I think it's beautiful that you embrace something as traditionally feminine as cooking, just as free will. Like I can enjoy cooking without it being this, definition of femininity, and I can also do some other stuff that's maybe in the masculine box and still be the woman that I am. I think that's important for us to set the standard of what, going forward, what femininity and masculinity in regards to behavior and what we like and what we can do, that it can be a mixed bag and we can be okay with that. What about you, Nim?
Hey, so, I guess the question is different for me as a non-Black trans person of color, and so a lot of my time at the moment is really trying to be in solidarity and in this weird virtual world that we find ourselves in, show up for my community, for my friends, for the people I love, and mobilize the trans community more broadly in support and solidarity with Black trans people. And alongside that, I am also cooking a lot. Interestingly, I think that being at home so much is really nice for slowing down and thinking about looking after our bodies. And the other thing I've just started doing is, for the first time since before I hit puberty, I've started trying to run, which is because my body is not used to it. But it feels like an interesting reclamation, because I realized that as a trans person, I was really sporty until puberty, and I've just been disconnected from my body in that way for so long. So it feels, it feels good.
Good. I think that that's also important, just connecting with your body in different ways. And cooking, to me, I think it controls what you put in your body. I know me particularly, because of COVID, I have been eating better because I actually have to go to the grocery store and get food to cook instead of just going to pick something up at Wingstop, at KFC, at McDonald's, or, some fast food quick fix. I literally have to go shop. And so what I'm consuming is much, much healthier, because when I actually go to the store and pick stuff, it is healthy things, because visually I like the way vegetables look. I like the way fruits look. I like the way, those healthier things look. So it does get you more connected to your body. So thank you for sharing that. Yannick, how are you taking care of yourself?
I've been doing a lot of meditation, which is key.
Right.
And I have been smoking a shit ton of weed, and I am grateful. But I've also been creating, working on rebranding, podcasting, YouTube channels, and creating music as well. And just decompressing once I get home from work, because when I come home from work, I am seeing people with their protest gear, with their signs. I've taken some social media breaks and just dedicated that time to having a dance party by myself. And that's how I'm coping. And I've also been doing a lot of cooking and trying different recipes, hopefully not trying to burn the house down. I'm loving the fact that I have a little bit of peace and quiet to really refocus, have this time to reset, even though it's critical times, and just evaluating and making sure also that they know people are aware of why the events are happening. So.
So thank you for sharing that. I think that what we share in common is music, because I have been creating my ass off in regards to like music and like redoing songs. I recently redid a classic by Karen White called Superwoman, this classic R&B song written by Babyface. I just did like a whole revamp of it. It's more jazzy and up-tempo. It's not fast like a dance song, but more like jazz, like a swing jazz type of deal. And I am so excited to share it. I'm probably going to share it on my SoundCloud soon. But I think having those outlets is really important for us to not only just for self-care, but actually to create things to share our talents. Because we have things a lot of times because we are trans, like when people call on us, it's really about trans stuff. It's really about, the trans narratives and sharing our experience as a trans person and what we think about gender and blah, 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 blah. But there's multifaceted trans people out here who do more things that encompass more things outside of transness. And I think sharing our talents outside of the trans narrative is so important. So I want to thank you for sharing that you do music, because I do too.
Awesome. Yes. I can't wait to hear it.
Yes.
I want to get, I'm going to start off with a hard question. I don't think this is a pussy question. I think this is a serious question. So we're going to start off with a hard one. So we know that the protest around the U.S. and, as we see, there's tons of solidarity happening in other parts of the globe that lets that Black Lives Matter, and they're standing up and protesting peacefully to support us. As far as our particular community is concerned in the U.S., how are we reconciling as a community, or you as an individual, the act of protecting Black men who are predominantly affected by police brutality, while we also know that they are predominantly the ones murdering us or attacking us as trans people? Even recently, Ayanna Dior, there's a video going around of her being mobbed by a group of Black men and Black women in a store. That's the most literally like within the past 2 days. Mm-hmm. When we think about Malaysia Booker a year ago in April, who was mobbed for the same exact reason as this week's Ayanna Dior, a fender bender gone crazy, and it turned into this mob of Black men attacking her. And then a month later, she was found dead. And then we talk about Kai Peterson, a Black trans man who was attacked by an attacker, and Kyer Rice, who was at work, a Black trans man who was at work getting attacked in Dallas by his coworkers at the barbershop that he works in. So we have in Dawana Johnson, because a lot of people think that not making the connection, they were like, but that don't have anything to do with police brutality. Dawana Johnson back in 2008, and this is just one that I was close to, so I'm mentioning that one. Dawana Johnson was attacked by a police officer on camera in the Memphis, in the actual police station, because she wouldn't respond to him calling her faggots and she's, and he beat her with his handcuffs on his hands, using them as like brass knuckles.
Ooh.
And so this is on camera. This is, and this is something that nobody stopped. None of the police stopped them from doing it, because she wouldn't respond to him calling her faggots and she's. And so that's an example of how we are also brutalized by police. And so how are you reconciling knowing that we're out here protecting, we're protecting Black men and women and everybody against brutality, but they predominate that demographic? How are y'all reconciling that they also can be the ones who can cause the most harm? Seve, I'm sorry. I just wanted to get out the way.
No, don't apologize. I don't apologize. It's a lot to think on. And I was actually like just before this call, I was talking with my girlfriend about it. She's a trans woman, but she's white, and she was just talking about how she's been called slurs on the street before, but never has experienced any sort of like violent harassment towards her, because the way I see it in the Black community, especially, like men performing femininity, or trans women who cis people believe are men performing femininity, are perceived as weak and less than. And I mean, I could put out 50 different descriptors that would still not justly describe how Black men feel about trans women and gay men and just femininity in general. How toxic masculinity has become so deeply ingrained in Black culture that even a Black cis woman is like, they just don't respect the idea of women or femininity at all. They still have this idea of that, like, they will still benefit from the patriarchy, and they're still, men are physically stronger and better, and they just have all these preconceived ideas that they get from media and their toxic fathers or their toxic mothers or whatever family members they're growing up with. I mean, and when it comes down to it, I've literally never dated a Black man, because every time I come out as trans to a Black man, they just have all these crazy assumptions about me that I can't even wrap my head around, that overwhelm me so much that I would just defer to not dating anybody at all. So yeah, I just think that, the deference from traditional masculinity is a big no-no in the Black community.
Right. And one of the privileges of being white is the individualism. So when it comes to Black community, we don't have the luxury of our actions not reflecting our community to the larger culture. Right. And so or the perception of that. So a white person can go blow up Sandy Hook, they can do Oklahoma City bombing. It's not going to reflect on the whole white community. There's an individualism that they have the luxury of having. When it's come to Black people, if you see a Black person doing something wrong, it's going to reflect the whole community. That's racism. That's how racism works. Right. And so I think that you bringing up that point, when Black men see a feminine entity and you're supposed to be a man, they feel, and they have verbalized this, you are undermining the Black man. You are making us seem effeminate, and you are misrepresenting us. And they a lot of them, the Hoteps, express this a lot. So I totally get what you're saying. What about you, Yannick? How are you reconciling it?
I am doing my damnedest to reconcile this. The fact that we, as myself especially, we spend so much time advocating for cishet Black men, and it's like almost a slap in the face when we see them turn around and attack us, the main ones that they're attracted to, the main ones that they're in our inboxes that they are attracted to. Now, and you have some trans-amorous, trans-attracted men that are speaking out, and yet they are being called all kinds of slurs, being demonized as less than, and we see this on a daily basis. And just the fact that when we, especially those of us that aren't passable, we have a lot of the passability politics on us, and people purposely misgendering us, and it's like, whoa, like, it's just so much, yet these are the same people that we are defending that's hurting us. And it's just wild.
Absolutely, and I see that in Black men too, but that there's a level of that in Black cis women. There is there is time I can. When we talk about reconciling things, I can definitely see a difference in how we respond to the police brutality against Black cisgender women. When we talk about like the Breonna Taylor, Taylor would have never gotten the response that George Floyd did, because we only give these kind of protests and up in arms things for when it is a Black man that has been murdered or a Black cishet man that has gotten some type of injustice. We only go to the streets for them. When it comes to Black women, when it comes to trans folk, when it comes to queer men or queer women, we never get this kind of response. And so I can call that out, but I also know that some of the women that I'm calling out the community as a whole being silent, they also can be just as transphobic. They can be the same people that turn, when we talk about Sandra Bland, she has homophobic videos out, but I still gotta say her name. I still have to, reconcile the idea that I know it is because of their Blackness, and just because they may be transphobic, just because they may be homophobic, I know that the same system that allowed her to be found dead in a jail cell, or that stalked George, that kept that knee on his neck for 8 minutes, that allowed him to die. I know that same system that didn't allow those cops to see their humanity can do me in as well. And so, yeah, I can hold the vendetta. I can hold a grudge against, some of the hypocritical things in the community. But when it comes to white supremacy, it doesn't really matter.
Right.
And so that's how I kind of reconcile it.
And just because someone is a homophobe or a transphobe doesn't mean they deserve to die.
Absolutely.
Exactly. And also, it's pivotal that you mentioned that about cis-het women, because there was no outrage. And not as big. It was outrage, but not as grand as it was with George Floyd.
Right.
And it's like, wow, but these are the women that are the backbone of civilization. These are the mothers of our children, our sisters, our aunts, our best friends.
Our warriors. Our warriors. They're always on the street and organizing.
Exactly. And they are, I dare say, those that are championing for the Black community. When are we going to give them their due?
Mm-hmm. So what about you, Josephine?
I think it's just going back to that point that you made earlier. You're right. Like, we can address that and also work to address the fact they also do violence to us. Like, I think about Tony Mcdade. Tony Mcdade was a Black trans man who was killed, and just the utter lack of outrage. One of my best friends, actually my best friend in the world, my roommate, he's a trans man, and he brought Tony to my attention. I was like, I just couldn't believe that I didn't know. And then I took a second, looked at myself, and I said, no, I can believe that I didn't know. Everything that I've ever lived in has kind of just prepared me to not know, to not be aware of the violence that he faced there. And because
and it just happened this week.
Cis-het Black men. Yeah, exactly. And it's just this. So what I do is I educate myself. I take a moment, I take a step back, and I say, I can put aside their violence to me for one moment to recognize the inherent wrongness, violence against people because they are Black. And I would much rather educate the Black men or the Black cis people who hurt us than I would have them die. So when I am out there fighting for them, I'm not just fighting for Black cis people. I am fighting for Black trans people because we can catch a bullet just like anyone else.
In my mind, you have to understand that how patriarchy works, not just white supremacy, how patriarchy works in being intertwined with white supremacy. The structure makes it so that anybody that is on the femme side, whether you were born AFAB or you're performing femininity in a certain way, it is not going to be as important as masculinity. So when we talk about oppression and the connections to that, and when we talk about Trisha Hill Collins, when she talked about the matrix of domination, there's tons of literature around that. Those are the nuances of oppression that we have to understand. That when Kimberly Crenshaw talks about intersectionality, I know these are like activist-y, woke buzzwords, but no, these are actual theories that have been tested, and people have literally done the work to be able to educate you about these intersections, educate you about this matrix of domination. Even if we go back to the Combahee River Collective, where the identity politics and how the nuances of oppression affect us in different ways. This is a perfect example of how patriarchy privileges men, even in their death, to be more important than all the other of us under them. But it oppressed them because the white supremacy comes in and says, yes, they are more of the threat. They're the evil. They're the most dangerous. That's why we created movies like The Birth of a Nation. the very first movie ever to be created was a racist movie to sell a narrative about Black men being rapists and criminals. And so those two colliding create an atmosphere that says they are more important, but they also the least important, so let's kill them. Do you see what I'm saying? That is the nuance.
Right.
So this podcast has a large listenership amongst white people. What are some of the things that you might want to say to them in regards to their allyship and how they can show up at this time that is less performative? Because I feel like there's a lot of performative stuff. When we look at people like Leah Michele from Glee getting dragged about her supportive tweet.
That fucking bitch.
That fucking bitch. Getting her Black castmates, getting her together and dragging her.
Ooh.
Because they're sharing that, you're fucking racist. You treated us like shit on that cast behind the scenes and we were just being professional. But now that, the show is over, we can be real, and they dragged her ass. And then we have China saying that the police brutality in America is inhumane, all while disparaging Africans during COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
So how dare you? And this type of performative support that we're seeing from tons of people, how do you want people to show up? What is the best way for allies to show up?
I feel like I'm always the first one to say something. I wanted to see if anyone else wanted to say something before I jumped in. I didn't want to step on anyone's toes, but the biggest thing is if you're white and you're able-bodied, you should be putting your body in front of Black people at these protests. That is what you should be doing. You should be at every protest, whenever you can, wherever you can, separating Black bodies from cops. And if you can't do that, the next thing you should be doing is donating to bail funds and spreading awareness and sticking up for Black people and amplifying their voices and not speaking over them. I can't stress enough how many times I've been spoken over by white people or non-Black people of color when I'm working on trying to organize, and they're just like, no, you're wrong. I'm like, well, I'm not. And if you would just listen, we could all be safer. And it's just this thing of I don't want to perpetuate the idea that all of the quote unquote violence and riots are from outside white agitators, but a lot of it is, especially in my city. We're seeing a lot of very performative white leftists who I know personally smashing in windows of businesses that have absolutely nothing to do with the issue going on. Small businesses, corporations, doesn't matter. They're just going and destroying shit and putting Black people at risk, getting Black people shot at and getting Black people arrested, while cops are literally just sitting there watching white people vandalize shit and not doing anything about it. And it's just really frustrating to watch people who I know, people who I've organized with for years, just go out and kind of set us backwards and endanger our lives and not listen to us when we say, hey, don't do that, you're endangering our lives.
If I may, I would say that one thing that can be done is also not making this about you for a social media opportunity. Seeing videos and pictures of people where they have stopped people from actually boarding up their businesses as a way to protect against rioters and looters, and they've stopped them just to hold a drill and take a picture. If you're going to be out there in the streets, be sincere without having an agenda. That's how you can be a solid ally. Not doing this for likes and clicks, not doing this to get followers. Do it because you mean it, and it does not have to be glorified on social media. And also, just taking the time to do your due diligence and call out your racist relatives, call out your racist coworkers, call them out. Call them out and let them know where they got us jacked up.
Absolutely. And particularly that really works in the workplace, because sometimes Black people don't want to lose their jobs. And so they are forced in a situation where they have to be quiet about unfairness that's going on because they don't want to buck up against a system that will easily get rid of them. So you, as the white ally, are the buffer. You say, hey, I don't think this is fair. Why is there not enough Black people being hired at this place? Whatever The issue is you can be the white person because you have a privilege that can step in and do that. And that can happen at the protest. That can happen when we're talking about conversations about the protest. What are we centering in our conversations among you and your white liberal friends? We know what Republicans are all about. We know what they're going to say. We know what the rednecks are going to say. We know what the conservatives are going to say. It is those liberals that I really, really feel like the ones that think there aren't racist or they don't have any racism to dismantle. It is those people that I want to hear. What are conversations happening? Are you prioritizing capitalism? Are you prioritizing businesses over lives? Because I don't give a damn about a Chase Bank being busted down. They have exploited the Black community, particularly for years with them shady ass loans. This is after y'all bailed them out, before and after y'all bailed them out, with shady loans and, predatory loans that were intentionally given to us or advertised to us so that can exploit us. And so these are people's business. I don't give a damn when it comes to Black lives. I just don't. I don't care. I don't want to hear it. And I also don't want to hear about what's the solutions. Like protesting and looting and the consequences, these kind of negative, they're really not meant to be solutions. They're meant to make you aware because you're not listening. It's meant to make you aware and to have you conscious of it and to disrupt. It is specifically meant to disrupt. It's not meant, even the protest ones, the peaceful ones and the violent ones, it is meant to disrupt the system. Just like the bus boycotts, it was meant to, those people who was the bus drivers, they had it to work, they had jobs, they had to work, but they wasn't riding them buses. It was peaceful, but they were disrupting the system. And so whether you think that's the right or wrong way, it's meant to be negative. It's meant to have a negative effect on the system, not meant to be a solution. The solutions can be talked about after. The demands can be talked about after. So how are you navigating those conversations when Black people are not around? How are you bringing Black people into the fold to have those conversations to help move the narrative in a more pro-Black way? How are you leading that kind of charge? So I do want to, because I think with white people, it's a really cut and dry situation. But when we talk about POCs, non-Black POC people, because I'm seeing some really weird white supremacist leaning conversations from POCs. How are we gathering our Latinx folks? How are we gathering our Asian folks? How are we gathering, people who are non-white, but they are of color? So how are we navigating those folks? Nim, can you talk about that?
I think there's a lot of work to do around getting non-Black people of color to step back and make space, hence offering to leave, and to, really be led by Black trans voices in this struggle. And I don't think that's just in this moment. I think that that's how we should be organizing generally. And I think that we should be working more with white trans folks and the wider LGBT community and putting ourselves on the line. And I think the risk for us is obviously different than white people. The experience is different than white people, but it doesn't mean that we don't have privilege and power in that, and that we need to be accountable to that and in solidarity in that.
And I think in understanding when you are aligning yourself with white supremacy, because we know that aligning ourselves as being the model minority, the myth of the model minority, we know that it's a reality in society, but it's also simultaneously a myth. It's not really real, but it's real in how people think. If you act a specific way, if you align yourself with whiteness, if you align, in multiple ways, in a physical way, in the way you talk, in your language, how you pronounce words, whatever you do, even in ideological sense, when you align yourself with whiteness as a minority, you put yourself in a position to gain privileges from aligning yourself with white supremacy. And we know that happens. We see it all the time when we look at Candace Owens, when we look at some of the conservative Latinx folks, when we look at Asian people who literally come in and definitely benefit from white supremacy when they align with whiteness. So I think it's really important as a non-Black minority for you to be really, really conscious in how you show up for Black people and how you align yourself with whiteness in believing racist narratives about us as a group and not dismantling those kind of racist tropes when we talk about, oh, they're just lazy, they're not getting out of the ghetto because blah, 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 not really realizing that there are specific laws that benefit you as a non-Black minority that we cannot take advantages of. It's just so many things that I think a lot of POCs don't really take advantage of or take a deep dive into and learn how, when they align with white supremacy, it really puts, no pun intended, but a knee on our neck as well.
100%. Yeah.
Anybody else want to add anything, Josephine?
No, I absolutely agree. I think that there's a key word there, and it's just kind of performative. There's so many POC, non-Black POCs and white people who are kind of in this fight performatively.
So tell me this, there's about our individual experience with police brutality. There's a fear, that like police brutality can be compounded by some, like gender cruelty, such as like strip searches, internal like cavity exams that people can do. As trans or non-binary people have, not for you to rehash it or relive it, but has there been any incidents in your life where you had come in contact with police officers and they just were totally inappropriate in a different way than your cisgender peers?
I've been very lucky to have very few cop encounters in my life. Actually, most of those were before I was even out as trans to myself. So I can't really speak on that. But I do know that it is like a big fear of mine of, being arrested and ending up in the wrong prison. Because, I can't even imagine. It's way more dangerous for Black trans women than it is for, trans math people and Black trans men. But a big fear of mine is like, going to the prison of the wrong gender and losing access to hormones and losing access to like my healthcare, which already right now is not great. But, it's something that definitely affects like how I act in public and how I interact with people at protests. And, it definitely dictates when it's time for me to get out.
I know me particularly, I've never had like a physical assault from I had some, like one of them touch my breast on some like, are these real or not type of deal. Not really fondle them like pervert fondle, but are these real? Do you need, are you going to have to take this shit off before I book you? That type of deal. He was being rude in that kind of way. But also a lot of times once they find out that in my younger years, not as I've gotten older, but when I was younger, when they find out that I'm trans, then the misgender style, what's your real name? What's your legal name? Even though my legal name has been changed, my name has been changed legally for a while. But they'll think I'm lying or think I'm not telling the truth, and then they'll call me Mr. or Sir. Like they really immediately turn into an asshole. When prior to that, when I hadn't told them my T, and I only usually tell cops my T so they don't put me, so they don't put me in some bullshit ass situation in a jail where I'm in population and crazy. Put me separate. And so, and so for me, when they'll treat me like a cisgender woman at first, being kind of nice and flirty kind of. And then when I'm trans, it totally flips, and misgendering and what you're out here immediately go, even if this has nothing to do with prostitution, immediately go to some type of prostitution where you're on the street prostituting, or what you doing out here? Are you working? All kinds of shit like that. So I definitely had those kind of experiences. I wouldn't say brutality, because of a privilege of being a queer, which for me, of being a queer person, when you cut on that queer lingo, that, hey, honey, good girlfriend. When you cut, for some reason in my life, cutting on that, hey, honey, makes them treat me nicer than if they thought I was just a cisgender man. When I was like living as a male in the world, it was something different how they treated me if they thought that I was a gay man. I was less of a threat. And that's some nuance in my experience.
I've never had something that is I think not in the same way, but I am Muslim and I wear a hijab. And I wasn't passing at the time, but a cop did ask me to take off my quote unquote hood, which is my hijab. And I explained to him very calmly, though I was terrified for my life.
And that's just one of those nuances when we think about imperialism and colonization. You know, if you're in America, if you don't fit cishet Christian, baby, you are an outsider. You are an outsider.
That's exactly true. That was perhaps the most like humiliated I've been in my entire life. Just, it was, to this day, it's something I don't even talk about with like some of my closest friends, because it was perhaps like the most disgusted I felt in like our society, but also just in myself.
So, Yannick, do you have any experiences in regards to cops?
Thankfully, I limit the time that I have to spend with officers. Nothing where it was like them getting inappropriate, but one interaction that I did have, as I'm also a Lyft driver, getting actually approached by an officer about what type of headlights I had on my car. And thankfully, I had a passenger with me, because I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm trans, I'm Black, first off, and it's at night, I'm doing this job, and, you know, worried about the kids in the car and this woman and my life. But thankfully, you know, she was able to help de-escalate the situation before it, you know, got into one of those situations that we're seeing on TV.
What about you, Nim?
I mean, I don't obviously experience police harassment in the same way, but as a trans person and a trans person of color traveling into the US, TSA often pull me for a random groin search. Yeah, and before I was like visibly trans, I got pulled. I'm the kind of wrong kind of brown for an airport, so I would get pulled for all sorts of searches. But in the last 2 years, it's very specifically been a random groin search.
That is so annoying. I remember this TSA officer, like literally, like jerked away in disgust and shock. Which she did a groin search of me in a way that, you know, like if they don't know you're trans and they do it, it's almost like, oh, what's that? But she jerked away in like, it just reminded me of when I was little, and, you know, you played that game during Halloween where you put your hand in a bowl and you don't know what's in the bowl. And they touched that, and they touched something that's squishy or something, and jerked their hand back. Like she literally like almost fell back on her ass. It was so extra that I felt like it was on purpose. Like it was like, you can't possibly have not met at least one trans person before me. Like, come on. Like, and so when she did it, she went to her officer. And so they're not trying to offend me. She's already offended me. but she's trying not to, like, she's trying to hint that she thinks that I'm trans, or so she goes to her supervisor, and the supervisor comes and says, hey, ma'am, we would like to search you again. She wasn't able to clear you. And she started to search me, and then she feels it. And I was like, I'm transgender. And she's being quite extra. And that's what she's feeling. She's feeling my piece. And the lady says, oh my God,
exactly.
Never known, and blah, 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 blah. And she was like, we just don't have this all the time. And I was like, actually, here's my card. If you need some training on how to handle trans people that come through the airport, here's my card. Y'all got coins. Y'all TSA, y'all got governmental coins. Hire me. I can tell you how to do it. And now, every time she sees me in the airport, every time I'm going through, she literally goes to somebody and tells them that I'm trans. Every time, because I travel a lot. Every single time I see her and she sees me, she thinks she's being slick. But because we're trans, we know what it looks like when somebody's telling our tea. She's going to a different person each and every time saying, ooh, you know that's trans. And they'll come over to me, stand next to me just to look me in my face. Like she makes my TSA experience horrible. And she's the boss.
Yes.
So yeah, it's wild. So in closing, let me ask y'all. So we have shared some of our individual experiences. I now want to talk about some of the things that you think could be solutions. I know that this is a big question, but just small ideas, just ideas that you think even, on a micro level, macro level, whatever, any ideas that you see that could be solutions in regards to police brutality, in regards to, just how we engage with the police state at all. Any ideas, the solutions that you might have as trans folks?
The guillotine.
For the officers.
That's it. For everybody. I don't guillotine everyone. I'm done. It's over. Just KKK, cops, the president, just guillotine. Yeah. It's time. It's time. The French did it. We can do it too.
Yeah. It was quite effective.
It worked.
What about you, Yannick?
For me, to be honest, I would just say burn the whole motherfucker down. Let's start over. Let's just start over. But, really making sure our voices are heard and also, standing our ground, but making sure that we're trying our best to document stuff as, much as possible, because sometimes there are some entities that are looking for trouble, and also call attention to the plight of not just cishet Black individuals, but our trans and queer individuals that are facing harassment from police officers, that are facing brutality, because it's unreported. There's not as much outrage.
Right, because we feel like they're not going to believe us over, and really that's Black as a whole, but definitely queer folks, because, if we hadn't seen these things on video, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. Like we wouldn't be having this conversation because we have to see it on video, because if we didn't see it on video, they're going to spin the story. They're going to create the narrative. They're going to do something that's, they're going to add something. They're going to lie. So yes, documentation is quite important. Yeah. Any more solution?
So I just found out from my friends at the Audre Lorde Project in New York that the NYPD have a budget of $6 billion a year, which blew my mind. And they've been doing this work to defund the police for a while, for a minute now. And I think that what we really need in this moment, or what I really need to do in this moment, is support mobilization towards people who are paying attention, to start paying attention to that. Because I completely agree with you. It's there's no fix to the police state. The fix is getting rid of it. Is getting rid of prisons, et cetera, et cetera. And I think on a cross-Atlantic fix, there's a real problem in the UK right now with a hell of a lot more solidarity than I've ever seen with African Americans in the face of what's happening. But in this way that is really it's because it's America's problem. And there's a real disconnect between racism in the US and racism here. And because our officers on the street, it's not actually true that they don't carry guns. There are every police force has a unit, or every national police force, has a unit. And when they have guns, they have massive machine guns. But because our street cops don't carry guns, there's this idea that it's not a problem here, and it's not true. Statistically, if you're Black, you're way more likely to get stopped and searched. In the UK, the prison population, if you're Black, is actually higher as a ratio to the population than it is for the US. Things that aren't in they're willfully hidden behind numbers, because the US population is so much bigger just by numbers, that this isn't the sort of knowledge that most people have. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done here in the UK around getting people to confront their racism and their complicity in white supremacy in the police state here.
Yeah, and
absolutely.
I think the idea of cops don't carry guns, so they're not dangerous. That's a dangerous idea, because as we saw, George Floyd wasn't killed by a gun. He was suffocated. He was asphyxiated. You don't need a gun to kill someone, or to have prejudice against someone enough to kill them.
Yeah.
It only makes it easier, but you can kill anyone with your bare hands if you try hard enough.
And I think that's the beauty of the internet, because that kind of information is not lost in the diaspora, in the connection, because we have a connection with the diaspora across the world. So we have people like you who can share the numbers. We have people, because I have heard that conversation within Black European conversation when I see videos on YouTube YouTubes of them talking about racism, when I see books that they've written and podcasts that they do, I hear the disparities of Black people in Europe, because I remember in my youth, everybody used to sell it like Europe was, they're not as racist as America. They're not as, homophobic as America. But then I grow up and I hear, trans folks and Black folks having a whole different story. It may not be exactly the same, but it's a whole different story. So the internet has definitely connected me with people to give me some real true tea, and also connected me with people to know that I have some brothers and sisters and non-binary siblings over there that are going through some of the same things, different little nuances, but it's the same thing. And I think that's also why we see a level of solidarity that we haven't seen before.
And of course, Europe orchestrated the whole fucking slave trade and colonized the world. Like,
booyah.
I was about to say, like, where did America learn to grow slaves and do colonization? They learned it from Europe. Like,
the idea that racism isn't the same here is absolute fucking nonsense.
Boom.
y'all ain't slick. You're not innocent. Damn.
And that's a privilege of white supremacy, that they got the power to change the narrative of white people.
They're just like, wait, we didn't do that. We didn't have slaves. What are you talking about? We never did that. What?
So before we go, I want you guys to share where everybody can find you on the internet. Felix, go ahead and go, because you've been the first one.
Oh, okay, sure. Because I'm always first. Sure, you can find me on Twitter. It's Felix now. I guess you can also find me on Instagram, but I don't use it. My Instagram link is in my Twitter bio. But I'm definitely most active on Twitter, so you can find me there. And I'm actually getting ready to start up a YouTube channel, so keep an eye out for that.
Nim?
You can grab me on Twitter. I'm at NMRLPH.
What about you, Yannick?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram, CWT Priestess, and I'm on Facebook as well. Y'all can just type in Yannick Taylor and y'all will find me.
Currently, you can only find me on Quora, Quora. I'm pretty sure that's how you spell it. Josephine Hoskins. I've tried to step back from social media recently.
So I am Diamond Stylze. It's DIAMOND STYLZ as in zebra. I am that on every single platform. You can find me. You can search that on YouTube. You can search it on Twitter. You can search it on Instagram. I am Diamond Stylze everywhere. I'm a 20-year vet activist.
Yes. Amazing.
In these streets doing a thing. So you can find me, even in Congress. I got a First Amendment rights case victory for suing my high school. So you can find me everywhere. So make sure that you follow me. And I want to thank Michelle for having us and letting us to do this conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys. This was awesome.
So thank you everyone for coming on to share and to talk about all of these things that I absolutely could not talk to with any kind of authority. Diamond, thank you so much for helping put this together and for being the co-pilot on all of this and for taking the keys. Where can people find you online?
Thank you again for having me. You can find me at Diamond Stylze on all platforms, DIAMOND STYLZ as in zebra, Diamond Stylze. My podcast is Marsha's Plate. That's Marsha as in Marsha P. Johnson. Marsha's Plate as in a plate of food. We are on all platforms. We are on every platform that you can think of that you can listen to podcasts on: Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, anywhere, SoundCloud, anywhere that you can listen to podcasts, you can find us. And I am everywhere too. So just search, Google Diamond Stylze.
Or just go to the link sheet in the description and you'll find a whole section with all of the links to Diamond stuff all over the internet and Marsha's Plate in general, which I'm going to say again, go and subscribe to them. Because if you think that you have completed sort of the global trans podcast collection by following just us and Gender Reveal, and Gender Reveal is really good too, you have not finished your collection without everything that Diamond is working on.
Let me finish by, if you are looking for a Black trans-led organization to donate to, I am the executive director, as we talked about in the beginning of the show. I'm the executive director of Black Trans Women's Inc. We do have a donation link. You can actually donate to Marsha's Plate. You can donate to Diamond Stylze or Black Trans Women Inc. We have a website and everything like that. Just Google us. And definitely we are doing the work out here in creating a better place for trans women, Black trans women particularly. We really center like immigrants. We really center, sex workers and poor folk. We really want to center the marginalized people and help them get on their feet. So your donations definitely help. So if you're thinking of looking for org, check us out.
So check the links in the description to get all of those links and lovely things from Diamond. And whilst you're following all of Diamond's things, why not follow us too? You can get us on Twitter at What The Trans. You can get us on Facebook /What The Trans, and you can get us on Instagram at What The Trans. We also have a website, whatthetrans.com. And don't donate to our Patreon this time. Donate to Marsha's Plate. You can find the link to that in the description, but you can get to that by just going to patreon.com /Marsha's Plate, all one word, and give them some cash. That's the end of the show, everyone. See you next time. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you for listening.
This episode of What The Trans was presented by Michelle O'Toole and Diamond Stylze. The news was written and researched by myself, Michelle O'Toole. This episode was produced by Joe Ross Barrett and Kate Glanfield and was edited by myself, Michelle O'Toole, Joe Ross Barrett, Ben Swithin, at Ben Swithin on Twitter, and Matt Reynolds, at Chai Tiefling on Twitter. And I'd also like to thank our patrons: Alexandra Lilly, Anthony Pena, April Heller, Becky Scott Fairley, Bernard's Pink Jelly Bean, Cassius Adair, Chris Hubley, Claire Scott, Derek Victor, Desiree Markland, Elliot McVeigh, Emily Phillips, Emma Doyle, Ian Cumber, Rowan Littlejohns, Karakan12, Catherine, Laker, Lauren O'Nions, Lewis Brown, Lanos, Maddie Bell, Matt Reynolds, Melissa Brooks, Mike Dickinson, Mina, Molly, Patreon user, Samantha Alice Raven, Sarah Bedful of Dogs Halliwell, Sophie Lewis, and Tower Watch. Thank you so much for donating. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.